Welcome back to MMA Al Dente. I am the guy who picked Cain Velasquez to defeat Fabricio Verdun. And I'm here to talk about Jimmy Flick taking on Nate Maness. All right, another Jimmy Flick fight, which means I get to bet on props and not feel guilty about it. Because Jimmy Flick, he's got such distinctive traits. He's one of those guys like Terrence McKinney or Na Liang, even though he doesn't fight like them. But where you can feel comfortable betting on his props. And even Terrence McKinney, I can't tell you if he's going to win by knockout or submission. I think he's more likely to lose by knockout, but either way, you just expect a finish. With Jimmy Flick, it's kind of the same thing, but you know if he wins, it's going to be by submission, and you know if he loses, it's going to be by knockout or TKO. Because sometimes things are just settled on that record level. I do much more than just read the records. I've seen every Jimmy Flick fight, every Nate Maness fight that you can get your hands on, that I could get my hands on. But sometimes it's just settled with the record. And Jimmy Flick, he's got 17 wins, 15 by submission, 2 by decision. Hence the prop bets. And his 7 losses include 6 by knockout or TKO and just 1 decision. Hence the props. He's just one of those guys. And, he's a big problem if he's able to get on top of you. He's got excellent jiu-jitsu, really good control, and submission threats every which way. But at the UFC level, I think he's relegated to a round one or bust fighter because he doesn't have the wrestling and the physicality to have this sustaining control type of fight where he methodically works you over. He's got a short window to get the victory, even though he got the win in round 2 against Malcolm Gordon, but Gordon's a more breakable fighter. But Jimmy Flick, he's incredibly dangerous on top, and if he is able to get on top of Nate Maness, I do think he's definitely the better grappler, and he's definitely a submission threat early. But I envision Nate Maness surviving, even though his last loss was a round 1 guillotine to Taira Bekov. But he's still shown on many occasions that he's got heart and grit, and he's got toughness to back it all up. And in addition to all that, he's definitely the bigger threat than Jimmy on the feet. Jimmy's not as bad as his record would indicate on the feet with 0 TKO wins, although he's definitely as weak and not dangerous as his record would indicate. But Nate Maness is still better than him on the feet and certainly more powerful. Nate's the more well-rounded guy for sure. I think if by some miracle this did go to a decision, I would still favor Nate because for Jimmy to win a decision would mean he would have to have a lot of control. And with that guy and his top game, if he's controlling you, he's going to win. He's going to finish you. So I think Nate Maness is going to weather the storm here early on, or maybe there is no storm and he just tames Jimmy Flick right away and pounds him out. But Nate, he has been defeated 3 times. He was defeated once by TKO to Taylor Lapulus, who got a big win 2 days ago. And Taylor was beating him up on the feet, but then stabbed him with a side kick to the body in round 3 and got him out of there. The one submission loss does come to Tagir Ulanbekov. Tagir got him with a good guillotine. Jimmy Flick's definitely a better submission artist than Tagir Ulanbekov as well, but he's not nearly as good of a wrestler. So there's that. And speaking of wrestling, Nate Maness' other loss is a 3-round decision to Umar Nurmagomedov, who is a challenger for the title probably in the next year or so. So forgivable loss there. Both guys have really only been beaten by good fighters. Even Jimmy Flick's losses, he's got 6 knockouts. They're good fighters generally. He lost to Will Campuzano, former UFC fighter. Levi Moles ground and pounded him. It's a guy that could be in the UFC. I say it every fucking week, or he could have been anyway. He lost to Charles Johnson and Alessandro Costa in the UFC, and also Ray Rodriguez pounded him out. And Chris Gutierrez as well. I don't even need to look at his record. I've seen all these fights. So despite him only having lost to good fighters, though, he is still quite breakable. I think that's evident. So this fight, I think, will be a TKO win for Nate Maness. I can't say whether or not Jimmy Flick will get him down or make it close early on, but I think all Nate has to do is get out of round 1, and then TKO him. And we saw Nate get out of round one when he was nearly knocked out by Tony Gravely. At the very end, you could argue he was saved by the bell or whatever, but he looked like he was halfway unconscious. And in round two, he was the one that separated Gravely from his consciousness. I don't know if he went completely out, but Nate took him out. I rewatched that fight recently. And also weathered the storm against Luke Sanders, who, if you're going to beat Luke Sanders, that's just how you do it. You lose round one to him and you beat him in round two. But he did that. And I'm not sure a guy like Jimmy Flick could do that against Luke Sanders. I think if he's getting overwhelmed in round one, it's only going to get worse in round two. Jimmy Flick has won by submission down the stretch. He won against Johnny Bedford, former UFC fighter, and he took that fight on very short notice. And he also beat the guy Nate Smith. Like he's got it in him to win down the stretch. But those are different fighters at the UFC level. Even though Bedford was a UFC fighter, but Jimmy Flick is not going to be the bully. I would be very surprised if he ever got a round three finish. The round two finish against Malcolm Gordon really surprised me enough. But Gordon is an extra breakable fighter himself. So I think this one in general ends via finish. My prediction is round two TKO for Nate Maness, but I haven't bet on his money line. And the over under is set at 1.5 rounds, with the under being minus 210. I think that's good, but I haven't placed a bet on it because the odds aren't that great. But really, I'm just going to look for the props because I'm very sure if Nate does win, and I do think he will, it is by TKO, most likely in round two. And Jimmy Flick, I think his path to victory is certainly submission, and submission in the first half of the fight. I have to say that because he got Gordon out of there in round two. But really, he should be getting any victory he gets at this level should be a round one submission before the tide has a chance to turn and he finds himself in a competitive fight where he can't keep up. I'd love to see Jimmy Flick win, by the way. I do like Jimmy Flick. I love all these like glass cannon type of fighters. But I think, yeah, he's not meant to last long in the UFC. You know, he came back after a retirement a few years ago and a great win over Cody Durden. That's probably his best victory, the triangle choke over Cody Durden, the jumping triangle. But yeah, he came back, got TKO'd twice, and even after a bounce back win over Malcolm Gordon, I think that's only going to lead to more TKO victories. Nate Maness, TKO round two. Like, share, subscribe, all that horse shit, and check out my other videos.